The back door swung inward, and Beth Collins froze with the smell of cold coffee and something sharper hanging in the air. On the kitchen floor lay Ruth Harmon, grey as flour, one hand still curled around a shattered phone. In the corner, a small boy clutched a stuffed rabbit and did not blink. Behind Beth, the stray dog set down a single oak leaf and quietly walked away. Before we go any further, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss stories like this one. 9 days earlier, none of that had happened yet. 9 days earlier, Cedar Mill, Ohio, was just a small town of red brick and quiet porches, folded between two rivers and a strip of highway that most travelers passed without noticing. Beth Collins opened her bakery every morning at 5:45, the way she had done for 11 years, first turning on the ovens, then the coffee, then the little brass bell above the front door so she could hear it when it moved. She was 58 years old, tall for a woman her age, with silver hair pulled back into a low knot and a stubborn line between her eyebrows that had settled there sometime in her 40s and never left. Her apron was always dusted with flour. Her hands smelled like sugar and yeast. She liked things the way she liked them, and she did not, as a rule, like surprises. That first morning, the surprise came in the shape of a dog. He was standing on the sidewalk when she unlocked the front, right where the street lamp threw its yellow circle onto the concrete. He was not big, not small either. He was the kind of dog nobody named a breed for, all ribs and long legs, brown fur mixed with patches of dirty white, and one ear that looked as though something had torn a small triangle out of the tip. He watched her open the door. He did not bark. He did not wag his tail. He just stood there, holding a single oak leaf between his teeth as if it were made of glass. Beth had seen a lot of stray dogs over the years. Cedar Mill had its share, especially after the mill itself closed and folks moved away, leaving pets behind like winter coats they no longer needed. She had a soft spot for animals, but a harder spot for routine, and her routine did not have room in it for a dog. So she did what she had always done. She reached under the counter for a leftover breakfast biscuit from the day before, cracked the door another inch, and tossed it out onto the sidewalk. The dog watched the biscuit land at his feet. He set the leaf down carefully, ate the biscuit in 3 quick bites, then picked the leaf back up. He did not run away. He turned around, walked to the doorway, laid the leaf gently on the threshold, and disappeared down the block without looking back. Beth stood there for a moment, the door still cracked, the smell of butter and warm bread drifting out into the dark street. She looked down at the leaf. It was a small oak leaf, the kind with the deep lobes, still green but starting to curl slightly at the edges. There was no bite mark, no tear, just a stem, held perfect, as if the dog had chosen it. She frowned, picked it up, set it on the counter next to the register, and went back to her ovens. Within an hour, the first customers were pushing through the door, and the leaf was forgotten under a stack of receipts. The second morning, he came back. Same time, same corner, same leaf. And again, Beth tossed him a biscuit. Again, he ate. Again, he left the leaf at the threshold, this time next to the flower pot she kept there for the summer geraniums. She stared at him a second longer that day. Something about the way he walked away, glancing back once at the corner, made her chest feel oddly tight, for a reason she could not name. By the third morning, she was watching for him before she unlocked the door. She stood behind the glass, wiping her hands on her apron, waiting. And he came, same time, same leaf. She did not open the door immediately that morning. She wanted to see what he would do. He waited on the sidewalk for 2 full minutes before he lay down, the leaf still gripped delicately between his front teeth, and simply looked at her through the glass, as if he could see the biscuit before she picked it up. Only then did she open the door, hand him the food, and take the leaf. It went on the counter with the other 2. 3 leaves now, in a small pile, all the same shape, all the same kind. By the 4th morning, Beth was rattled without knowing why. She told herself it was ridiculous. He was a stray. He had learned that a woman at a bakery would feed him. He carried a leaf because he liked the feel of it in his mouth, or because he had picked it up on the way and forgotten to drop it. There were 100 reasonable explanations. She listed them out loud to herself as she rolled dough that morning. None of them settled the strange feeling in her stomach. Because the truth was, a dog carrying something in his mouth was not carrying it because he had forgotten it. A dog carrying something in his mouth was carrying it because he meant to. By the 5th morning, she started paying attention to details she had not noticed before. He was thin but not starving. His coat was dirty but not matted, which meant somebody, sometime not too long ago, had brushed him. There was a faint, pale line around his neck where a collar had been, and the collar had been removed. Somebody had let him go. Somebody had wanted him to be a stray, or had failed at keeping him, or had died. And the leaf. Always the leaf. Green oak, stem intact, deliberate as a signature. She started asking around. Frank at the hardware store said he had seen the dog cutting across the parking lot after dawn a few times, headed north. That direction meant Sycamore Lane. Beth did not react. She just nodded and paid for the light bulbs she had come for and walked out. Sycamore Lane, where Ruth Harmon lived. 2 blocks north, yellow house with green shutters, a big oak tree in the backyard that reached up over the fence and dropped acorns on the sidewalk every fall. Beth knew that tree because she had grown up looking at it from her own bedroom window, back when she and Ruth were girls in braids playing hopscotch on chalk squares. She knew that tree because it was the same tree they had climbed the summer they were 12, when Ruth had dared her to jump from the low branch to the porch roof, and she had done it and sprained her ankle, and Ruth had cried harder than she had. That evening, after she closed the bakery, Beth stood at her own kitchen window for a long time, looking at nothing. Ruth Harmon. 2 years, 1 month, and 11 days of not speaking to each other. She had counted, though she would never have admitted to anyone that she had counted. 2 years, 1 month, and 11 days ago there had been a fight over the fence, a fight that had been stupid and small and had grown into something that felt too big to fix, and now they walked past each other at the grocery store as if they had never learned each other's names. She almost went that night. She almost put on her jacket and walked the 2 blocks and knocked on the yellow door, but she did not. She told herself she would think about it. She told herself she was reading too much into a dog. She poured a glass of water and went to bed and slept badly. The 6th morning, the dog came again. Same leaf, same look. She fed him. She took the leaf. She did not follow. She could not have said later why she did not follow that day. Maybe pride, maybe fear. Maybe both at once, the way pride and fear always seem to be the same thing, pretending to be 2 different ones. The 7th morning, she noticed something new. When she opened the door to give him the biscuit, he did not eat it right away. He held it in his mouth alongside the leaf for a moment, then walked to the edge of the sidewalk and looked north, toward Sycamore Lane. Then he looked back at her, then north again. It was the closest thing to speech a dog could offer. Beth felt her hand tighten on the counter behind her. She said out loud to no one, "You want me to come, don't you?" The dog blinked. He set the biscuit down. He picked it back up. He walked away with both the leaf and the biscuit still in his mouth, and he did not glance back at her that time. Not once. She stood at the door with cold air blowing in around her ankles and told herself, again, that she was imagining things. The 8th morning she had barely slept. She had lain awake most of the night thinking about Ruth, not about the fence, not about the argument, about Ruth's kitchen table, which had a little chip in one corner from the time Beth had dropped a cast-iron pan on it in 1982. About Ruth's laugh, which was loud and honest and made other people laugh whether they wanted to or not. About Ruth's daughter Melanie, who had grown up and moved to Cleveland and had a little boy of her own, and about the pictures Ruth used to show Beth of that little boy when they still spoke. She could not remember his name. She had tried, and it would not come. Daniel, Denny, something with a D. She had let herself forget it, because forgetting had been easier than staying angry, and staying angry had been easier than saying she was sorry. She was at the door before the dog even came that 8th morning. She stood in the cold with the smell of the ovens behind her, and she waited. He arrived at the usual time, but that morning he did not stop on the sidewalk. He came right up to the doorway, laid the leaf at her feet, and then he sat down. He looked up at her, and for the first time she saw in his eyes something that made her stomach turn over. Not hunger, not fear, exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that comes from doing the same thing over and over and having nobody hear you. She almost cried. She did not know why. She held the door open and he came in without hesitation, walked once around the little dining area, and then walked back out and stood on the sidewalk waiting for her. She was not going to close the bakery. She was not going to leave. She was going to feed him and take the leaf and go back to work, because that was what she had done every morning for 11 years, and it was what any sensible person would do, and there was surely a perfectly ordinary explanation for all of this. But she stood there another full minute, and then she reached back inside, grabbed her keys off the peg, turned off the ovens, flipped the sign to closed, and locked the front door behind her. The dog was already halfway to the corner when she stepped out onto the sidewalk. He glanced back to make sure she was following, then kept walking. He walked slow. He walked at the pace of a person, not the pace of a dog. He waited at every corner. He did not run ahead. He did not stop to sniff. And when they reached the corner of Sycamore Lane, he did not turn to look at her. He just kept going, straight to the yellow house with the green shutters at the end of the block, and around the side to the back gate, which stood ajar. He nosed it open. He walked into the yard and lay down under the oak tree with his chin on his paws, and he did not move again. The back door of the yellow house was open, not wide, just cracked, the way a door is cracked when somebody has meant to close it and forgotten. Beth stood at the bottom of the porch steps with her heart pounding in her ears. She called out, "Ruth!" No answer. She called again. Nothing. A magpie chattered somewhere over the neighbor's fence. The wind moved the branches of the oak overhead, and a few leaves came loose and drifted down onto the grass, and one of them landed at Beth's feet, small and perfect and green. She climbed the porch steps. She pushed the door open. She said Ruth's name a third time, louder, and then she stepped inside. The house smelled wrong. It smelled the way houses smell when nobody has cooked in them for a while, and something else, sharper, something like sickness. The living room was empty. The television was on, but the sound was muted, and it was showing a cartoon that Beth did not recognize. Some kind of animated animals in bright shirts jumping across the screen without meaning. There was a small plate on the coffee table with a half-eaten piece of bread on it and a dry cup that had once had juice in it. The refrigerator, when she passed the kitchen doorway, hummed the way refrigerators do, but its door was standing open a few inches, and a bottle of milk had leaked down the front and dried into a pale streak on the tiles. And then she saw her. Ruth was on the kitchen floor between the counter and the refrigerator, on her side, one arm folded under her cheek, the other stretched out with her fingers curled around the shattered plastic of a phone. Her eyes were closed. Her chest was moving, barely. There was a mark on the side of her forehead where she must have hit the counter or the floor when she fell. Her lips were dry and cracked. Her skin was the color of paper. Beth's knees went weak. She grabbed the doorframe. She said, "Ruth, Ruth, honey, oh God." She dropped to her knees and put her hand on Ruth's shoulder, and Ruth did not respond, only made a small sound in the back of her throat, and it was then, in that same instant, that Beth heard the other sound, a small, thin, exhausted whimper coming from the corner of the kitchen behind her. She turned. He was sitting in the space between the pantry door and the wall, folded into himself the way a small child folds when a small child has been folded for a long time. 7 years old, though he looked younger. Sandy hair sticking up on one side, cheeks stained with tear tracks that had dried and re-wet themselves over and over. He was wearing a Spider-Man t-shirt and pajama pants that did not match, and he was clutching a floppy, stuffed rabbit with both arms, and his eyes were the empty, wide, still eyes of a boy who had done all his crying already and had run out of tears without anyone hearing him. "Baby," Beth said, and her own voice broke on the word. She reached out her hand and did not move any closer because she did not want to scare him. "Baby, it's okay, it's okay. Grandma's going to be okay. What's your name, honey? Can you tell me your name?" He did not answer at first. She thought for a terrible second that he could not answer. Then he opened his mouth and made a dry little sound and swallowed and tried again. "Danny," he said. "I'm Danny. Grandma won't wake up." "How long, baby?" Beth said. "How long has Grandma been like this?" Danny thought about it the way children think, counting on his fingers under the rabbit's ears. His hand shook. "3 sleeps," he said. The lady on the phone said help was coming, but the phone broke. Beth felt something in her chest crack open. She fumbled her own phone out of her apron pocket, and her hands were shaking so hard that she dropped it on the linoleum before she managed to hold it steady enough to dial. She spoke to the dispatcher in short, sharp sentences. She gave the address. She said stroke. She said 7-year-old child. She said 3 days. The dispatcher told her to keep calm. She told the dispatcher to send them faster. While they waited, she did what she could. She wet a dish towel and pressed it against Ruth's dry lips, one careful drop at a time. She kept saying Ruth's name in a low voice like a lullaby. She kept one hand on Danny's back and rubbed circles between his little shoulder blades. She spoke to him in the softest voice she had, the one she used to use with her own son a long time ago, before her son moved to Portland and became a stranger who called on birthdays. She told Danny about the bakery. She told him about a dog with a torn ear who had been very brave. She told him he was very brave too. She told him his grandma was very brave. The sirens came 7 minutes later. 7 minutes that felt like 9 years. The paramedics moved through the house like people who had done this 1,000 times, and one of them lifted Danny into her arms and carried him out to the porch so he would not have to see them work on his grandmother. Beth followed. She could not stop shaking. On the porch, she saw the dog. He was still under the oak tree in the yard, but he was standing now, watching. When the stretcher came out through the back door with Ruth on it, the dog took 1 step forward, then stopped. He looked at Beth, and then he turned around and walked away across the yard and out through the back gate and down the alley behind the house. She never saw him come back to the bakery after that day. The paramedics said stroke. The ER doctor said stroke. They said if help had come 1 more day later, they were not sure. They said the next 24 hours were critical. Danny sat in the waiting room in Beth's lap with his stuffed rabbit against his chest and his cheek against her collarbone, and he did not cry. He had done all his crying already, in a house where nobody had been listening. Beth called Ruth's daughter Melanie in Cleveland, because that was the number she found written on the calendar on Ruth's refrigerator, and Melanie did not answer the first 3 times. On the 4th attempt, a man answered. He said he was Melanie's boyfriend. He said Melanie was in the hospital herself. He said it in the flat voice of a man who had been in a hospital for a long time and was tired of saying so. Beth pressed a hand against her forehead. She asked what had happened. He said car accident 4 days ago, drunk driver. He said Melanie was in a coma. He said Danny was supposed to have been with them, and it was only because Ruth had begged to keep him for the weekend that Danny was not. He said he had not been able to reach Ruth. He said he thought Ruth was just angry with him. He said he had been busy with the ICU. He said, "Please tell me the boy is safe." Beth said, "The boy is safe." She said it in a voice that came from somewhere older than her, a voice she had not used since her own son was small, and she stroked Danny's hair as she said it, and Danny fell asleep against her shoulder with his little fist still curled in the fabric of her apron. She stayed there in that plastic waiting room chair for 6 more hours without moving, because moving might have woken him, and because there was nowhere else on earth she needed to be. That should have been the end of it. Ruth would recover or she would not. Melanie would wake up or she would not. Danny would be taken care of, one way or another. Beth would go back to her bakery in the morning and open the doors, and the ovens would warm up and the coffee would drip, and life would go on the way life always went on in Cedar Mill. She would have done her part. She would have followed the dog. She would have made the call. She would have saved a life. That would be enough. But it was not the end. It was only the beginning of what she was going to have to look at, because when she finally left the hospital, near midnight, after handing Danny into the arms of a kind social worker named Rita, and after Rita promised her that she would stay with Danny herself until Melanie's boyfriend could get down from Cleveland, Beth walked back through the parking lot to her old blue pickup, and she sat in the driver's seat, and she did not start the engine. She sat there for a long time, and in the silence, she started to do a math she did not want to do. 9 mornings, 9 leaves, 9 biscuits tossed through a cracked door with barely a look, because she had been in a hurry, because her ovens needed watching, because she did not want any trouble. Danny had said 3 sleeps, 3 days on the kitchen floor, which meant that on the first morning the dog had come to her bakery, Ruth had still been fine. The dog had not been raising an alarm. The dog had been trying, in some way she could not begin to understand, to reach her before the alarm even needed to be raised. Or maybe he had been coming for another reason entirely. Maybe he had been trying to tell her something older than any of this. Something that had started long before the stroke and long before the fence. She thought about the fence. She thought about the pale line on the dog's neck where a collar had been. She thought about the way he had lain down under the oak in Ruth's backyard, as if he knew that yard, as if he had lain there before. And then she thought very clearly, for the first time in almost 20 months, about the last real conversation she had ever had with Ruth Harmon, which had not, in fact, been about a fence, which had been about a dog. She started her truck. She drove home. She did not sleep. The next morning she opened the bakery again because she did not know what else to do, but she stayed by the front window all morning, watching the sidewalk, and the dog did not come. She left biscuits on the mat outside for 4 days in a row. She left water. She left a note which she felt foolish writing that said only, "Thank you, come back." The biscuits stayed there until other dogs found them, or the rain ruined them. The dog did not come back. Ruth stayed unconscious for 2 full days. She woke up on the 3rd day and did not know her own name. Beth was in the room when it happened. Ruth blinked at the ceiling, then at the nurse, then at Beth, and then she said, "Where's the bread?" That was the first thing she said, not a name, not a place. The bread. Beth had smiled with her whole face and cried without meaning to and squeezed Ruth's hand and said, "Right here, honey, I'll bring it tomorrow." Ruth had squeezed back. Barely. But she had squeezed back. The recovery was long and it was not gentle. Ruth had lost most of the use of her right side. She could not at first put a spoon to her mouth or a sock on her foot without help. Her words came out wrong. She wanted to say water, and she said window. She wanted to say Danny, and she said Debbie, which was her own long-dead sister's name, and Beth would feel her heart squeeze every time. The doctors said the pathways would come back with work. Some of them, not all of them. Danny came to the hospital every Saturday. Melanie's boyfriend brought him down from Cleveland, where the boy had been living with Melanie's aunt while Melanie was still in the ICU. His name was Tom, Melanie's boyfriend, and he was a plumber with big soft hands and a tired kindness in his face. And Beth understood almost immediately that he was going to be the one to hold all of this together while it needed to be held. He and Beth developed a wordless routine. He would drive Danny down on Friday nights. Danny would stay with Beth in the little apartment above her bakery, in the guest room that had been her own son's room in another life. On Saturday mornings, Beth would take Danny to the hospital, and he would climb up onto the chair beside Ruth's bed and hold her good hand and tell her stories about school in Cleveland. And Ruth would smile the crooked smile that the left side of her mouth could still make. He talked to Ruth. He did not at first talk to Beth. It took him 3 weekends before he did. It happened on a Sunday morning. Danny had woken early, and Beth had come down to the kitchen of her apartment in her robe and found him sitting at the little table with his rabbit on his lap, looking out the window at the alley behind the bakery. He was 7 years old, and he was sitting the way an old man sits, quiet and small and heavy. Beth poured him a glass of milk. She sat down across from him. She did not say anything. She had learned over 3 weekends that Danny would talk when he was going to talk, and not before. He said, without looking at her, "The dog was Mama's." Beth's hand stopped on the way to her coffee cup. "What, honey?" she said. "The dog with the ear," Danny said. He touched his own ear with a small finger to show her which one. "He was Mama's, when she was little. Grandma told me. His name is Buster. Grandma gave him away because Grandpa said he was too big for the house. He went to a farm." Mama cried and cried. Beth sat very still. She said, "When did Grandma tell you that?" "When I was 5, Danny said. "There was a picture. Grandma had a picture of Mama and Buster on the porch. Mama had pigtails. Buster was little. Grandma keeps the picture in the book, in the drawer, the one under the sink where the good spoons are." Beth had been in Ruth's kitchen 1,000 times before their falling out. She knew the drawer. She said, "The drawer with the good spoons." Danny nodded solemnly. "Mama said Buster was the best dog in the world. Grandma said Buster was old now. She said he probably wasn't around anymore. But he came back. He came to the door, only I couldn't open the door, and Grandma couldn't get up." Beth's throat closed. She could not speak for a moment. She said finally, "Baby, that dog. He came to my bakery every morning for 9 days. Did you know that?" Danny looked up at her. His eyes were the darkest blue she had ever seen on a child, the color of the sky at 9 at night in summer. He said, "He was looking for you, for me. Grandma said if she ever got sick, she'd send somebody for you, because you were her best friend a long time ago, before the fight. She told me that. She said you'd come." He picked up the milk and drank a small, careful sip. "He was smart," he said. "He knew." Beth pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. She had not cried in front of anyone in 20 years, not since her mother died. She did not cry then. She stood up. She walked over to the sink and she ran the water, and she splashed it against her face, and she stood there for a full minute with her back to the boy who was casually breaking her whole heart at her breakfast table. Then she came back and she sat down and she said, "Danny, honey, tell me every single thing you remember. About Buster, about Grandma, about all of it." He did. He told her that Grandma had said Buster was a gift, and Mama had loved him more than anything, and Grandpa had put him in the truck one Saturday morning and taken him to a farm in the country, because there was not enough room in the house for a growing boy and a growing dog, and Mama had refused to speak to Grandpa for 3 months. He told her Grandma had cried too, but not in front of Mama. He told her Grandma sometimes still cried about it, and when he asked why, she said it was because sometimes you can't take back a thing you did, even if you spend the rest of your life sorry for it. Beth stared at him. Buster. A farm in the country, 1992. She remembered. She had been the one to argue with Ruth about it at the time. She had said it was not right, sending a child's dog away. Ruth had said her husband Bill had made the decision, and there was no unmaking it. Beth had gone home upset. It had never occurred to her that Ruth had been just as upset. It had never occurred to her that Ruth had also thought it was not right. It had just been one of those things decades ago that had cracked something small between them, and small cracks are the ones that spread. She thought about the dog. She thought about how thin he was. She thought about how old he had to be if he was truly Buster. Almost 30 years old, for a dog, was impossible. But something else could be true. He could be the son of Buster, or the grandson. He could be a dog someone at that farm had raised and lost, and who had somehow found his way back to a house he had never actually lived in, drawn by some instinct that Beth did not understand and did not need to understand. All that mattered was that a dog had walked into her town and had spent 9 mornings trying to bring her to a woman who had needed her, and Beth had almost not gone. That was the part she could not put down. She started going to see Ruth every day after that, not just Saturdays. Every single day. She would close the bakery at 3 in the afternoon instead of 4, drive to the hospital and sit with Ruth in the physical therapy room and encourage her while she tried over and over to squeeze a soft rubber ball with her right hand. She would bring bread that she had baked that morning, still warm, and she would tear off small pieces and feed them to Ruth by hand, because Ruth's own hands still trembled too much. She would talk. She would say the names of things and wait for Ruth to say them back. Fork, cup, sun, rain, Danny, Buster. Rain. The nurses started to know her by name. One of them, a young man named Marcus, with kind eyes and a shaved head, told her once in the hallway that friendships like this were the reason he had gone into nursing. Beth had blinked at him and said, "Friendship?" And Marcus had smiled and said, "Ma'am, in 12 years of doing this job, I have seen exactly 3 people spend as much time at a stroke patient's bedside as you have. 2 of them were husbands. 1 was a daughter. That's what family looks like." Beth had walked away from him without answering, because if she had stayed, she might have said something she could not take back. Family. She had thought about that word all the way home in the truck. Family. 6 weeks after the stroke, on a Tuesday in the middle of the afternoon, Beth Collins drove Ruth Harmon home from the hospital. Ruth walked with a cane and a slight drag in her right foot, and her right hand did not close all the way, and her speech was better, but still slow, and she got tired within 20 minutes of standing. She did not say much on the drive. Beth did not either. They passed the elementary school where they had both gone as girls. They passed the water tower with the year of Cedar Mill's founding painted on the side, 1867, and Ruth looked up at it the way you look at an old friend. When they pulled into Ruth's driveway, Ruth said quietly, "I don't remember the last few years very well." Beth said, "That's all right, we've got time." "I remember," Ruth said, "that we didn't talk." Beth looked at her hands on the steering wheel. She said, "That was my fault." "No," Ruth said. "Yes," Beth said. "I said some things. I said some too." "Yeah, but I said them first." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Doesn't matter now." "It does matter, Ruth. I need to say it." "You already said it." Beth turned her head. She looked at Ruth. Ruth was looking at the oak tree in her backyard, visible over the top of the house from where they were parked. Her eyes were wet. She said, "You said it every day for 6 weeks, Beth. With the bread, with the coffee, with that time you brought Danny the little dinosaur pajamas. You said it. You don't have to say it with words." Beth was crying then. She did not try to hide it. Ruth reached across the seat with her good hand, and Beth caught it, and they sat there holding hands in the truck for a long time. 2 old women who had wasted almost 2 years of a friendship that had lasted since they were 7 years old on the same first-grade playground. Beth helped her up the porch steps. She held the door open. Ruth walked in slow. She stopped in the middle of the living room and looked around at the walls of her own house as if she had been away for 100 years instead of 6 weeks. And then she looked at Beth and she said, "I want to go to the kitchen." Beth's stomach turned. "Ruth, honey, you don't have to. Not today. We can just sit." "I want to," Ruth said. "I need to. Please." So Beth walked with her slowly into the kitchen. The floor had been cleaned. Tom had come down from Cleveland the weekend before and helped Beth scrub it, and the 2 of them had cried together in that kitchen without either of them mentioning that they were crying. Ruth stood in the doorway and looked at the linoleum where she had lain for 3 days. She did not shake. She did not fall apart. She just looked. Then she said, "Where's Danny?" "He's in Cleveland with Tom, honey. He'll be down this weekend." "Good," Ruth said. "That boy needs his father." Beth blinked. "Ruth, Tom isn't Danny's father." Ruth turned her head very slowly and looked at Beth. "Yes, he is. Melanie's boyfriend." Melanie's fiancé. They were going to tell everybody when she got better. She wasn't better yet. She hasn't been well since Kyle died. Tom is Kyle's cousin. He came to help her with the boy. And they fell in love. Beth, honey, they fell in love. It's the best thing that's happened to that girl since her husband died 3 years ago. Ruth's voice was slow but very clear, one of the clearest sentences she had said since the stroke, as if the news itself had cleared a path through the fog for a moment. Beth stared at her. She had not known any of that. She had not known that Melanie was engaged again. She had not known that Melanie's first husband, Kyle, had died. She had missed it. She had missed 3 years of a family she used to know like her own. 2 years, 1 month, 11 days without a phone call, and she had missed the death of a young man she had watched grow up. She had missed a widow's grief. She had missed a new love story. She had missed a mother becoming a mother again on her own. She sat down at Ruth's kitchen table. She put her forehead against her hands. Ruth eased herself into the chair across from her. She reached out her trembling right hand, and this time she made it work. She patted Beth's arm. She said, "Kyle worked at the mill. Do you remember Kyle? He fixed your porch light one summer. He was that boy from the high school football team, number 12. Beth remembered. Broad shoulders. A gap between his front teeth when he smiled. He had climbed her ladder in a t-shirt and repaired the wiring in 15 minutes and refused payment. She remembered. It was a heart thing, Ruth said. He was 31. He collapsed at work. Nothing anybody could do. Oh, Ruth. Melanie called me that night. She said she couldn't breathe. She said she couldn't stand up. She said Danny was in the next room and she didn't know how to tell him. And I sat on the phone with her until 3 in the morning. That was the night I went out into the backyard and I stood under the oak tree and I promised whatever was listening that if there was anything left in me, I was going to use it to help my girl and my grandson. Beth had lifted her head. She was listening the way she had not listened to anybody in a long time. You know what I did the next morning, Beth? What? I picked up the phone. I dialed your number. I got as far as the 4th digit, and then I put it down. Beth's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Because I was too proud, Ruth said. Too proud. Over a fence. The fence didn't matter. I know it didn't matter. I always knew it didn't matter. I said something cruel about your Ricky, and I knew I shouldn't have said it, and I knew it the second it came out of my mouth. Every year since, I would go out into that yard, and I would look at that fence, and I would think, I'm going to walk over there tomorrow and say I'm sorry about your boy. And every year I did not. Beth's chin trembled. Ruth had said something cruel that afternoon over the fence. She had said Beth had raised her son too soft, and that was why he had moved so far away. Beth had said something worse back. She had said Ruth was going to end up alone one day with nobody to talk to, and it would serve her right. That was the sentence she had spent 2 years trying to unsay in her own head. I was going to say I was sorry too, Beth whispered, about Ricky, about everything, about what I said back. Ruth nodded. I know. They sat there. Ruth, Beth said after a long time, I need to tell you something. About the dog, Ruth said. Beth looked up. How did you know? Danny told me yesterday in the hospital. He said a dog like Buster came to your door for 9 days. He said the dog brought you here. Is that true, Beth? It's true. I have the leaves. I kept every one of them. Ruth started to cry. She did not sob. She just cried the way old people cry, quietly, with her eyes still open, tears running down the wrinkles of her cheeks. She said, "Buster died in 1996. I know because I called the farm. I called every year for a decade to find out how he was. He lived a good long life, Beth. 14 years. He was gone before Melanie was even in high school." She wiped her eye with the heel of her hand. "That was not Buster." "I know, but he knew where to come." "He did." "Beth, do you remember the letter?" Beth frowned. "What letter?" Ruth pushed herself up slowly from the table. She said, "Come to the drawer, the one under the sink, the good spoons." Beth went. She knelt down and opened it. Old drawers stick. She had to pull twice. Inside, under a soft cotton napkin, was a photograph album, small, the size of a paperback book, its cover faded blue. She lifted it out. She looked back at Ruth. Ruth nodded. Beth opened it. The first page had a photograph of a little girl with pigtails, maybe 6 years old, sitting on the front porch of the yellow house. Melanie. And in her lap, half asleep, was a puppy with brown fur and white patches and one ear that had a small torn triangle out of the tip. Beth stared. She stared at the ear. She looked up at Ruth. "Same dog?" "Same ear," Ruth said. "Same dog line, same mother. That farm out on Route 9. The Dewey's farm, Bill's cousins. They kept dogs for generations. Same lineage. Buster's grandpups, or great-grandpups by now." Beth turned the page. Another photograph. 2 little girls, both about 8, standing barefoot on the porch. Braids, freckles. Beth on the left, Ruth on the right. Someone had written on the back in ballpoint pen, faded but still readable. "Bethy and Ruthie, Easter, 1970. Beth touched the photograph with the tip of one finger. She had not known Ruth still had this. She turned another page, and another. And on the 5th page she found the letter. It was folded in half, tucked between 2 photographs, old paper, Beth's handwriting, 1992. She recognized her own loops before she even unfolded it. Her heart was pounding. She looked at Ruth. Ruth said, "Read it." Beth read. "Ruthie, I've been thinking about it for 2 weeks. I know Bill didn't mean it to hurt her, but it did hurt her, and it's not fair. Please tell Bill from me that he can build a bigger doghouse in a weekend. Please tell him Melanie is going to remember this her whole life. I'll come help. I'll bring the wood. Please don't send Buster away. I know it's not my place. I love that girl like she was mine, and I love you, and I'm asking, please." Beth. Beth's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the letter. She said, "You never showed him this." "No." "You never told me you got it." "No." "Why?" Ruth wiped her eyes again. "Because he'd already taken Buster out to the farm the day before I opened it, and I thought if I told you, I'd have to admit I hadn't fought him hard enough, and I couldn't stand that. I was ashamed. So I put your letter in this book, and I hid the book in the drawer under the sink, and I never opened it again until I taught Danny where the good spoons were, and he pulled it out one day and asked me about the puppy." Beth folded the letter with slow, careful hands. She put it back in the book. She closed the book. She looked at Ruth. She said, "You still got it. All these years. You kept it." "I kept it," Ruth said. "I never knew you tried. I never told you I tried." Beth thought about the dog, the one who had come to her door. She thought about how, if you took the fence fight backwards, and the Ricky comment backwards, and the years of silence backwards, and the letter backwards, and if you kept going backwards, you eventually arrived at a summer day in 1992, when Beth Collins had sat down at her kitchen table and written a letter to her friend Ruth Harmon, because a little girl was going to be sad and a dog was going to leave a house, and neither of them had ever spoken of it again. And 34 years later, a dog with the same torn ear and the same watchful eyes had walked into Beth's town from that same farm on Route 9, or from somewhere else entirely, and had brought the letter back to her in the shape of an oak leaf, one at a time, for 9 mornings in a row. She was not a religious woman. She had gone to church as a girl, and she had drifted out of it as a wife and a mother, and she had never much needed it to make sense of things. But she sat in Ruth Harmon's kitchen that Tuesday afternoon, and she thought that maybe sometimes the world had a memory. Maybe sometimes things you had done for love did not go away just because nobody was watching. Maybe sometimes a small kindness you had almost forgotten came back around, in fur and quiet pause, to give you one last chance to walk 2 blocks. Ruth reached across the table and took Beth's hand. Beth held on. They sat there until the light in the kitchen went orange with sunset, and the shadow of the oak tree stretched all the way across the linoleum floor. That would have been enough. It would have been enough for any story. But the story was not finished, because 2 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon, Beth Collins came home from the hospital where she had gone to visit Melanie, who had begun to squeeze her hand for yes and no, and she found the dog waiting for her on the sidewalk outside her bakery. He looked worse than before, thinner, muddy. There was a raw spot on his hip where the fur had been rubbed off, and his good eye had a yellow crust in the corner. But he was standing, and he was watching her, and he was not carrying a leaf that day. He was carrying nothing at all. He was carrying a limp. She dropped to her knees on the sidewalk in her apron and her coat. She said, "Buddy, come here. Come here, boy." He came. He was slow. He did not run. He walked to her and he sat down between her knees, and he put his head against her shoulder and he closed his eyes. And Beth held on to that dog on the concrete outside her bakery for a long time, and she said over and over, low into the fur behind his good ear, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." She took him inside. She fed him. She fed him more than she had ever fed a dog. She warmed a bowl of chicken and rice for him, and she watched him eat it in 3 careful bites, the way he had eaten every biscuit she had ever given him. Then she called the veterinarian, and she called Ruth, and she called Tom in Cleveland. She said, "He's back." She said, "He is coming to live with me." She said, "No, I don't need permission. I'm keeping him." The veterinarian, a young woman named Dr. Morris, was gentle with him. She said he was probably 10 or 12 years old. She said his teeth were bad. She said the ear had been torn a long time ago, probably as a puppy, either by a rusty gate or by another dog. She said the hip was arthritis and old injury. She said, "He is not going to have a very long time left, Mom. A year, maybe. 2, if we are lucky." Beth said, "Then he's going to have a very good year." And she took him home. She named him Buster the Second. Ruth cried when she heard. Danny laughed so hard when he met him at the bakery the following Saturday that he fell off his chair, and Buster the Second licked his ear until he stopped laughing and started giggling, and it was the first time in months that Beth had heard that child sound like a child. She thought that was the ending. But the story was still not finished, because on a Saturday morning in the 2nd week of November, 6 weeks after Buster the Second came home to stay, Beth was rolling out biscuit dough in the bakery kitchen when she heard the bell above the front door jingle. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked out to the counter. Standing there was a stranger, a man in his 50s, tall, in a heavy Carhartt jacket, holding a knit cap between his big, scarred hands. He looked nervous. He said, "Ma'am, is your dog around?" Beth said cautiously, "May I ask why?" "Because I think he might be mine." Beth felt her stomach drop through the floor. She said, "I'm sorry." "Name is Wallace Dewey," the man said. "I run a small farm out on Route 9, half-hour east. My cousin Bill Harmon used to bring dogs to me back in the day for training. His wife Ruth's family, God rest Bill's soul. My father used to keep bird dogs, and I kept up the line for as long as I could. Last year my wife passed. I couldn't keep up with everything anymore, and the last of that line, an old boy with a torn ear, he ran off in October. I looked for him. I looked for him for 2 months. I put up flyers. Somebody told me a few days ago that there was a dog at a bakery in Cedar Mill that fit the description. I drove over to see. I saw him through the window. Ma'am, that is my dog." Beth felt as if the floor tipped. She held the counter. She said, "You are Wallace Dewey, of the Dewey's farm." "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Wait here." She went into the back. Buster II was asleep on his blanket in the corner. She knelt down and stroked his good ear, and she cried, without making any sound, for 1 full minute. Then she washed her face, and she walked back out. She said, "Mr. Dewey, may I tell you what he has done since he came here?" He said, "Yes, ma'am, please do." She told him. She told him about the 9 mornings. She told him about Ruth. She told him about the leaves. She told him about Danny on the kitchen floor. She told him about Melanie and Tom and the letter in the drawer. She spoke for 20 minutes without stopping. He listened. He did not interrupt. He did not look impatient. When she was done, he sat down on one of her chairs, and he put his knit cap on the table, and he ran both his hands over his face and stayed like that for a while. Finally, he said, "Ma'am, my wife Louise," before she passed. Her family was from Cedar Mill originally. She and Ruth Harmon were second cousins. Louise used to bring that dog into town when he was younger. She used to walk him down these very sidewalks. She would stop at your bakery for coffee. Do you remember? Beth blinked. She thought back. A small woman with a grey braid down her back, gentle voice, always ordered black coffee and an apple turnover. She had come in maybe a dozen times over the years. Louise. Beth had known her only by that name. She had not known she was married to a Dewey. She had not known the dog she sometimes tied to the parking meter outside was the same line as the puppy Ruth's Bill had taken away. "I remember her," Beth said. "I remember him. He was quieter then. He was younger then. And he had a home. He was Louise's dog more than mine. When she died, he stopped eating for a week. He would sit at the door. I thought I lost him twice before I really lost him. When he ran off, I thought maybe he had gone off to die somewhere quiet. I made my peace with it, or I thought I did." Beth said, "Sir, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." "Yes, ma'am." "Did he ever in all his life come to Cedar Mill with a leaf in his mouth?" Wallace Dewey looked at her for a long time. Then he smiled, and his smile was the smile of a man who had not smiled in a while. He said, "Ma'am, Louise had a thing about oak leaves. She thought they were good luck. Every fall she would pick a fresh green one before the frost came, and she would press it in a book. And every time she came into town, that dog would trot along behind her, and she would pick one from the yard, and she would hand it to him, and he would carry it the whole way like it was the most serious job in the world. It was a game with them. She would say, 'You keep that safe now, Cooper.' And he would carry it, and he would set it down at her feet whenever she stopped at a bench or a shop, and she would praise him and pick it back up when they walked on. He carried 100 leaves for that woman. She died in October. First frost was 2 days later. He ran off a week after that." Beth put her hand over her mouth. Wallace Dewey looked at his big, scarred hands. He said, "He was looking for her, wasn't he?" Beth could not speak. "He came into town," Wallace said, "and he went to a bakery because that was where she used to sit. And when the woman there didn't have Louise for him, he did the only thing he knew how to do. He brought the leaf. Because that was what he did for Louise. He kept it safe." "Oh, God," Beth said into her hand. "Ma'am," Wallace said, "ma'am, don't, please." He got up. He walked around the counter. He did not know her and she did not know him, but he put his big hand on her shoulder, the way a stranger will do when a stranger sees another stranger hurting, and he said, "Ma'am, that dog spent 9 mornings with you because he was looking for the woman who used to sit at this counter drinking coffee. And on the 9th morning, when he still could not find her, he took you to the closest thing he could think of. He took you to the yard of a woman whose husband had bought his grandfather from my father. He knew that yard. He remembered that yard. That yard smelled like his own family to him. He took you to what he knew, and it turned out to be where he was supposed to go." Beth was crying openly. She could not stop. "Ma'am," Wallace said. His own voice was thick. "Ma'am, I did not come here to take him from you. I came here to see him one more time. I came here to say I was sorry to him for not looking harder. He has a home. You are his home. That's clear." Louise would have laughed and said, of course. He ended up with a woman who bakes. That was always his weakness. Warm bread. Beth laughed. She laughed through her tears, and Wallace laughed too, quietly, and Buster the Second, whose name they were both about to change without saying it, wandered out from the back with his blanket dragged behind him, and stopped when he saw Wallace. His tail did not wag, but he walked slowly on his sore hip all the way across the bakery floor, and he pressed his forehead against Wallace's knee for a long moment. Wallace put his hand on the dog's head and did not move for a while. Then the dog turned around and walked back to Beth and lay down at her feet and closed his eyes. Wallace nodded. He picked up his cap. He said, "His name is Cooper, Ma'am. If you would keep that name for him." Louise gave it to him. Beth said, "Cooper, I will. And if it wouldn't be too much trouble, I'd like to come see him from time to time if he wants to see me. I won't come more than he wants. You come any time you want, Mr. Dewey." "Wallace, please." Beth. They shook hands over the counter. Wallace Dewey drove out to Route 9 that afternoon, and Cooper stayed at the bakery. And Beth Collins went upstairs after closing that day, and she sat on her couch with the dog beside her and the light of an early winter evening coming in through the window, and she thought about how many people it had taken to make this ending. A woman named Louise, whose name she had not known and would never forget. A boy named Kyle, who had died at 31. A young widow named Melanie, who was learning to speak again. A plumber named Tom, with big soft hands, who had shown up for a boy that was not his by blood. A 7-year-old named Danny, who had stayed calm on a kitchen floor for 3 days because his grandmother had told him once that Beth Collins would come. A man named Wallace Dewey, alone on a farm, letting a dog have a new home because he loved the dog more than he needed to keep him. A dog who had carried a leaf across town 9 times because a woman he loved used to tell him, "You keep that safe now." And a woman named Ruth Harmon, who had written back to Beth Collins that same day, in a wobbling hand still slow from the stroke, a note on a folded piece of paper that Danny had brought over to the bakery the next Saturday morning. Beth had opened it at the counter. It had said, in a shaky pencil, one line: "Thank you for walking over." Ruth. Beth had put that note in the same book she now kept in her top desk drawer. The little book had a pressed oak leaf on every page. 9 of them, dry and brown by then, but stem intact. Every single one. Winter came. The snow fell hard that year. Cooper slept by the ovens in the daytime because he liked the warmth. And he slept on Beth's bed at night because she had discovered in her 50s that she liked the warmth too. Ruth walked over from Sycamore Lane every morning when she was strong enough, taking the 2 blocks slowly with her cane, and she sat at the corner table in the bakery for an hour with her coffee and her toast. Sometimes Danny came down on the weekends, and he would sit at the counter with a hot chocolate and draw on the back of receipt paper, and Cooper would put his old head on Danny's shoe. Sometimes Tom came too, and he and Beth would talk in low voices about how Melanie was doing and about how the doctors had said she might come home in the spring, walking with a cane, speaking slowly but coming home. Sometimes Wallace Dewey drove in from Route 9, and he would sit with Cooper for a while on the sidewalk out front, and Cooper would put his old head against Wallace's knee, and Wallace would take out a small green oak leaf from his coat pocket, one he had picked from the tree behind his own barn, and he would hand it to Cooper. Cooper would hold it in his mouth, and Wallace would say, "You keep that safe now, boy." And Cooper would look up at him with his good eye, and it would be the same look. It had been the same look since the beginning. On a Saturday morning near Christmas, Beth stood at the front counter of the bakery and looked out the window. Snow was falling lightly on Main Street. The little lights she had strung up around the window frame twinkled soft yellow. Danny was at the corner table with Ruth, teaching her a card game he had learned in Cleveland, and Ruth was laughing the crooked laugh her stroke had left her with, but it was laughter, and it was hers, and it was loud. Cooper was asleep by the ovens. Wallace's truck pulled up outside, and Wallace got out and stamped snow off his boots on the sidewalk before he opened the door. The bell jingled. Cooper opened one eye and thumped his tail 3 times and closed it again. Beth thought about the 8 leaves she had left on the counter without wondering, 8 biscuits she had tossed through a cracked door without going out. 8 mornings a dog had come to tell her something, and 8 mornings she had almost turned away. She thought about the 9th. She thought about how easily she might have not gone that day either. She thought about a boy on a kitchen floor for 3 days, and how close, how terribly close, the world had come to a different ending. She thought about how sometimes the whole meaning of a life came down to whether you noticed a small thing at your feet, a leaf, a phone call you didn't make, a letter you didn't open, a neighbor you didn't visit. Sometimes the difference between kindness and a lifetime of regret was 2 blocks. She looked at Ruth. Ruth looked up and caught her eye across the bakery and smiled. Beth smiled back. She picked up the small blue photo album from the shelf under the register. She had been keeping it there since the day Ruth had shown it to her. She opened it to the last page. She smoothed her hand over the pressed oak leaf pressed there. She thought about all the people who had, without knowing they were doing it, kept a promise for her. Louise and Wallace and Cooper and Ruth. And she thought about all the people she was going to keep promises for from now on. Ruth, Danny, Melanie, Tom, whoever came next. She closed the book. She went to the door, and she flipped the sign to open, and the bell jingled softly above her, and Main Street rolled out into a snowy Saturday morning that smelled from the sidewalk like warm bread. If this story reached you somewhere in the world, wherever you are right now, take one small kindness with you today. Notice the thing at your feet. Walk the 2 blocks. Send the letter. Answer the door. Because the leaf in your hand might be somebody else's whole life waiting for you to look down and see it. And if this story moved you, give it a like. Tell me in the comments the person you're going to reach out to this week, and hit subscribe so I can keep bringing you stories like this one. Until next time, go make somebody's 2 blocks worth walking.